Welcome, brothers, sisters, fellow travelers. My name is Joel and this is Good Crazy.
I've talked previously about what Christianity isn't. And that's really important, to know what some of the snares that hold us back from being Christian are, to understand some of the misconceptions. But what I want to talk about now is what Christianity really is. And I think Jesus gives us a clue when he said famously, "I am the way, the truth, and the life." And if we focus in on that specific word, way, right? He is the way. To me, it's rather obvious that what he's saying is he gave us an example of how to live, because that is one of the most fundamental questions that we as human beings have, right? Is how are we supposed to live our life? And he's saying, I am the way. And what way is that? It could be generally summarized as the way of love or the way of peace. But unfortunately, those terms are often misunderstood, I would say, in the world in which we live. People will say things like peace through strength, by which they mean peace through violence, right? They mean pummel your enemy into submission, and then you'll finally have peace. But that's just a temporary cessation of conflict. That's not actual peace. True peace is when both sides in a conflict come back into harmony, come back into peace, no longer wish to fight each other. So, a better explanation of the way of Jesus, I think, is the way of non-violence. Right? We really have to understand the concept of violence and non-violence to understand the way of Jesus. Because violence, essentially, is the use of force, not necessarily physical force, but use of force to achieve whatever your goal is. Maybe it's because you believe that what you believe is right, and you need to force others to do it for their own good. But nevertheless, it's violence. It could be coercion, like blackmail or other things, to essentially manipulate someone into doing what you believe is in the benefit neither of yourself or of all people. And that is the opposite of what real love is, because love is not forced. Love doesn't need to force itself, because love knows it is the best way. Peace is the best way. There is no need for violence. And the story of Jesus encapsulates that very well, because on its surface, you have a person who is supposed to be the Son of God, who can tell a storm to stop with just words, who can walk on water, who can heal miraculously, who can come back from the dead, who says he can call on thousands of angels to protect him if necessary. But instead of using all of that power for his own benefit, he chooses to allow himself to be arrested, to allow himself to be tortured and killed, to show us the way of nonviolence, to show us the overpowering effect of love on other people. Because deep down, we know that's what love is about. When you look at the political divide that exists today, they may have so many different opinions about what they believe, but the one thing they seem to share in common is they don't like being put upon, right? They don't like someone else forcing them to do something that they don't agree with, because we all feel deep down that that is not the way of love. That is not the right way. It is in violation of our own free will. And so Jesus shows us another way, and it is the way of our Father in heaven. Because after all, our Father, right, is all powerful. He has the power to make things as he wants them to be. He is showing us that power and force are not the way. The way is love. And it can be difficult, right, to put into practice, or it can seem difficult to put into practice what Jesus is asking of us, right? To turn the other cheek, to not resist evil, to love our neighbor, to love our enemy. It can seem difficult. It can seem to be impossible. But once we understand some of the other lessons that Jesus is showing us, it becomes so much easier to see how to apply it in our lives. For instance, one of the key lessons of Jesus' life maybe one of the most obvious ones, is that death is not the end, right? The most powerful lesson that came out of Jesus' life was that he died and hundreds of people saw him alive again so that they could know death is not the end. Therefore, suffering is only temporary. As he said to the criminal who died beside him on the cross, today you will be with me in paradise. Something much better awaits us, a place without suffering. So suffering is temporary. Death is not the end. And when you fully believe that, it fills you with a degree of fearlessness, right? Because all of these things in time will pass. And if they're going to pass, then how are we going to choose to live the life we live right now? We could choose to live out of fear of violence and organize our life around the fear that exists in this world. Or we can choose to live fearlessly, knowing that when we die, our human death, we will continue to live, and that the suffering we experience here is only temporary. And if we suffer for good, for a good cause, if we suffer for love, then we will benefit from that sacrifice that we made from then on, as Jesus did. The second lesson that we learn from Jesus is the faith that he had in us as people. Just like our Father in heaven, when he created all these things, he declared them good. Jesus, too, believes that what God has created is good, and that includes humanity. He believes in us, and that is the opposite of our enemy, Satan. Right? In Revelation, it describes Satan as the accuser of his brothers. This is really important as far as understanding the difference between Satan and Jesus, right? That he sees us as unworthy, as not good. But Jesus says the kingdom is inside you, right? The goodness of God has been put within you. And if you believe that most people are good at heart, then you know, no matter how difficult it may seem for them to change, they too are capable of changing. And I speak from experience in that, where I grew up in a religion that taught me in certain ways to be cruel to others. I could shun another person because they were deemed to be an unrepentant sinner. I could cut off all communication with them and believe they know what they're doing. They know how to change. It's their fault. I could look at them with indifference because I believed that I was right. And I am grateful to have been given the opportunity to change who I was. And so I feel like my own life is testament to the fact that a person can be capable of cruelty because they are blind, because they don't see, but inside they are good. And what's necessary then is to elicit that goodness out of them. And therein lies the tricky part, right? The path of nonviolence. How can we draw out the goodness of others? And it isn't, at least according to Jesus, it isn't by forcing them to do things our way. Rather, it is by having a concrete belief, a firm belief that if our way is the right way, we don't need to convince anybody or persuade anybody. It will just be shown with time. And that person is on whatever other person who may not agree with this in the moment, they are on their own path. And they need to explore those paths. They might think, well, I've found a better way. And they deserve the time to explore that path and see where it leads. And when they find that it doesn't lead to happiness, they may look around and say, well, what else is there? And if we are, as Gandhi put it, living our truth, which is living a life of nonviolence, love, and peace, to know that that is going to appeal to the goodness that lies within them, to believe just as God does, have faith in humanity, that we are capable of changing. That is the key to nonviolence. And there are so many great modern examples of how powerful nonviolence can be. You have Leo Tolstoy, who is maybe one of the first examples that I'm familiar with of a person who at one point was a soldier, at one point did things that he looked back upon as evil, and to have believed that he was following Jesus, only to recognize that the way of Jesus is nonviolence and to completely change who he was. And then Tolstoy's writings influenced others, including Mohandas Gandhi, who was one of the best proponents of ahimsa or nonviolence. And his way changed India forever, right? Because the British regime in India had no intention of leaving. They were exploiting one of their colonies, as they had done in many other cases. But the will of the English people to dominate another area of the world began to erode when they saw the peaceful way of Gandhi. That way of living changed the English people. It didn't change everyone, didn't change Winston Churchill, but it changed enough people that the desire to continue there and to force their way upon the Indian people eventually disappeared, enough so that they could form their own country. And the same is true of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., another amazing example of someone who preached and lived nonviolence. The Civil War of the United States was a bloody conflict that technically removed the legality of slavery, but it didn't change racism in this country, at least not very much. So there were Jim Crow laws in the South, where there was still this division, still the segregation. And King, in a very difficult time, he went against the established order, not with violence, not by encouraging people to take up arms, but by believing in the goodness of others, believing that if enough people saw the plight of African Americans, if they saw the plight of Black people in the United States, that they would want things to change. They would no longer put up with the established order. And certainly racism still exists today. It's far from perfect, but we live in a much better world thanks to the efforts of Dr. King and all the people that marched with him that proved the power of nonviolence. Because it's one thing to say that nonviolence is the way of Jesus, to believe that is possible, but they have given us examples of how the world changed because of following that example. And we can do the same today. That's what's important to realize is that Gandhi lived in a time where you could reach people through radio. Television was pretty new. So the ability to reach millions of people was still difficult. Dr. King lived in a time when television was pretty normalized, but even so, the internet didn't exist yet. Now we live in a time like no other in human history where the power of nonviolence, if acted upon by enough people, can really change the world we live in. To really believe that most people are good at heart. Most people don't want war. We want to live in a world of peace. We want to live in a world where everyone has their needs met. And if enough of us believe that and agree to that and live in a nonviolent manner, we can change the world. And it's important to believe that. So what I'm going to be doing, I'm going to read from some of the writings, Tolstoy, from Gandhi, from King. I'm going to share their message on the power of the way of Christ, of nonviolence. And in my next video, I'm specifically going to talk about one of the key qualities in order for us to really embrace nonviolence within. That is fearlessness. It can be difficult in the world in which we live to be fearless, but if we understand it, if we wrap our minds and hearts around what it means to be fearless, you and I, everyone, we are all capable of being nonviolent, just as Jesus was.
Until next time, may you know love, may you have peace, and may the truth set you free.